have heard of Persephone, the emo queen of the underworld. Brooding and sulking, yet seductive and terrifying, this Greek goddess appears as a liminal figure in other people's stories. She usually shows up when heroes must travel to Hades, the underworld, to complete some task or reckon with themselves. Now she is known as the goddess of destruction, but in the original stories involving her, the name Persephone is preceded by words that translate into holy, dreadful, and thoughtful. Holy Persephone, dreadful Persephone, thoughtful Persephone. What is so terrifying about this goddess, especially since we don't really know much about her? Before she became queen of the underworld, this goddess may have had a name, but it wasn't often uttered. In fact, she was simply referred to as Kore, which translates into girl or maiden or worse, receptacle. After she is violently abducted by the god of the dead, she comes to have the reputation for being clever and discerning, as all come to know her as. But how did this happen? No one knows. It's not written anywhere. For now, we will leave Persephone to wander the underworld. A few thousand years later, I'm sitting in my office in my new job at Marquette University, teaching philosophy. I am 29 years old. Given that most people think philosophers look like this, I remember thinking that it might be helpful to have me, a younger woman with a PhD in this male-dominated discipline, as a professor, not just for women in my classes, but maybe for everyone. Yet, as I reflected honestly on my classes, I saw what research and education bears to be true. Men dominated class conversations and had the appearance of smarts, while women kept quiet overall. So, I started asking some women to come to my office. I wanted to encourage them to hear their good ideas, and after talking with dozens of them, I had an insight. It was an idea for a book. It appeared to me both in scope and style complete. For now, we will leave me at my desk to work out the details of that book. What I am interested in is intellectual empowerment. What it is, how it happens, and what keeps people, especially those who identify as women and girls, or who identify as gender fluid or non-binary, from feeling empowered in this very specific way. The slogan of women's empowerment loosely correlates to supporting women's causes around the world, whether that's materially, socially, spiritually, emotionally, and so on. My interest in intellectual empowerment connects to some of those ways, but is distinctive from them. Intellectual empowerment pertains specifically to the ways in which people know that their ideas can have value. If a person is undermined in her capacity as a knower, to use philosopher Miranda Fricker's phrase, not only does she herself suffer, but the whole world is harmed as a result. Fewer contributions of knowledge lead to less of it available in the world, which harms everyone. But first, let's understand the landscape of intellectual disempowerment. In education, it's well documented that boys speak at a rate of 4-to-1 to girls. Girls receive more comments about their personality than they do about their smarts from their teachers, and they receive less quality feedback overall. In college, men consistently underestimate the GPAs of women in their classes, and still, curricular materials at all levels are male-dominated. In the workplace, while half of the workforce is women, we do not see change happening in ways that value and promote women as thinkers. While we may wish to think that progress is happening in those ways, it isn't. And the appearance of progress is not itself progress. Studies show that in the workplace, women are less likely to speak than their male counterparts, and when they do speak, their ideas are less likely to be engaged. Moreover, when their ideas are heard, they are subjected to stereotypes, resulting in pervasive bias in the workplace. Finally, women, when they are heard, especially in positions of leadership, receive a lot more negative and critical feedback in performance reviews. Finally, the art world provides an especially painful example of this landscape. A massive 2020 study of 1.5 million pieces of art sold at auction reveals that multiple people can assess an anonymous work of art to be worth a certain amount but that when that work of art is revealed to have been created by a woman, that value plummets by an astonishing 47.6% at auction. A painting's value might be assessed at $40,000, say, but when it's revealed that that art was created by a woman, that value plummets to $20,960 at auction. The artist may be good for a woman, but not valued as an artist. If she were, obviously her art, which is an expression of her ideas, would be valued at the same amount that men's art is. Those are just a few examples of the ways that women and girls can be disempowered. When women are actively disempowered, we can point to someone who has wronged them, like a teacher who doesn't call on girls in class, or a boss who speaks over their employees in a company. I left academia for 5 years to teach English to high school girls. Yeah, it was wild. And when I would teach the active and passive voices in writing, I would often use this example for the active voice. Maria kicked the puppy. Then the girls would all get upset. When I taught the passive voice, I would use this example. The puppy was kicked. And then the girls would really get upset. They wanted to know who would kick a puppy. Sometimes it's not evident who is inflicting the pain, but the result is the same. I remember another example from that high school. One day, students sleuthed out that my spouse teaches English at a local all-boys high school, so naturally they wanted to Skype together for a class. We did. And on that day, I saw a dramatic change in these girls, who the day before had come into class doing cartwheels, writing math equations on the board, and arguing about politics. Suddenly, in response to different questions during this joint class, the girls would say, well, I don't know, but, and it's only my opinion, but where had my girls gone? What had happened not only to their confidence, but to their belief that their ideas had value and they have a right to say them aloud? When we debriefed the next day, I asked them how it went. I didn't like it, one girl said, and the others readily agreed. Did the boys do anything wrong? I asked. No. Were they impolite, argumentative, or mean? No, they all agreed. And the boys weren't. They were kind and thoughtful interlocutors. But the puppies had been kicked. Such is the force of widespread intellectual disempowerment. How can we help care for women and girls in this specific way? Of course, there is no easy solution to this problem, but I propose 3 ideas. First, advocate. The idea I have is one of active advocacy, where people in relative positions of power do the reaching out, instead of simply saying yes when someone asks them for help. There's a palpable difference between saying, I want to write that recommendation letter for you, or I think you should apply for that promotion, and just agreeing to do those things when asked. Both are important, of course, but we must seek out opportunities for others that align with their desires. And if we don't know what someone might want or how someone might want to be recognized, we should do something novel and ask her. Advocacy shouldn't be a solo enterprise, however, as unfortunately, most of the work of advocacy falls to women, especially women of color. So another piece of this puzzle is to help create a culture of advocacy by insisting that all do their part. Moreover, as those doing it know, advocacy work is work and ought to be counted as such in employee reviews and compensation. Second, amplify. Women in President Obama's office popularized the concept of amplification, which provides a powerful corrective to intellectual disempowerment. Amplification describes how a person can elevate the ideas of another, legitimizing both the ideas and its speaker in the process. It happens like this. Maria says an idea to a group of people. Rather than letting that idea detach from its speaker and float away, The person wanting to affirm that idea says Maria's name along with the idea, amplifying both. The idea then becomes Maria's idea. I bet that nearly all women and girls can remember a time in their lives where their ideas have been ignored or even stolen. I can think of many times in my own life where my good ideas have turned up elsewhere, with others being praised for my work. And though it's a tricky cerebral issue to figure out who owns ideas, the plain fact is this. When women and girls aren't given credit for their insights, especially if or when those insights are claimed by others, their sense of themselves as thinkers, and therefore themselves as selves, is diminished. Third, adore. I am convinced that amplification and adoration are reduced to mere tools or techniques, if not grounded in adoration. This word is not too much. From the Latin adorare, the word literally means to call to someone held in high esteem. In religious contexts, it's understood as worship, but I'm understanding it here as a human-to-human connection and showing the ways that we call out to others, holding them in high esteem by virtue of their inherent dignity. Without adoration, actions can ring hollow and inauthentic. This is in part why diversity initiatives can tend to elicit eye rolls from employees, or people can feel tokenized on account of their gender or other identity markers. Adoration is not easy to cultivate in a world steeped in insincerity and quick judgments, especially online. But that's what makes it so important, because it's a commitment, day in and day out, to coworkers, colleagues, students, and all members of our human community. Adoration affirms the actuality and potentiality of another. We are all vulnerably human, and beautifully so. As I often tell my students, what you think, who you are, and what you do matters. And I don't think that many people, especially young people, hear this enough. Advocacy and amplification, when rooted in adoration, lets them know this to be true. And now we're in a position to talk about why any of this matters. Intellectual empowerment leads to epistemic joy, which is a joy in coming to understand oneself and appreciate others in our individual and shared capacities to know. We don't tend to think about joy so much, and it's easy to understand why, given all of the injustices in our world. But the joy I have in mind is both existent and aspirational, and it's worth fighting for. The word epistemic comes from one of the Greek words for knowledge, episteme. Knowing that our ideas have value and contribute to shaping how we understand the universe is an essential aspect of our lives. This point is essential for everyone, of course, but it's especially important now for those who have long been excluded from that intellectual life. Now, my idea of intellectual empowerment is a strange one, though, because it does mean that a person must be allowed to be wrong and also must be allowed to fail in her ideas. It does not mean that a person's ideas are right simply by virtue of her having them, but it does mean that a person has a right to those ideas. The knower, then, is able to take up the hard mental work of critique, deliberation, and dialogue. This feeling is validating, even if or when she makes mistakes. Indeed, we might say that making mistakes is critical in helping a person feel this thick sense of joy, especially in contrast to gender schemas that put enormous pressure on women and girls to be perfect and not make such mistakes. Yes, I'm saying that making mistakes can bring us joy. Because intellectual empowerment is laced with this huge human capacity, and epistemic joy isn't just about being right or having a seat at the table. It takes a lot of work to expand the ways that we view women in this way. Epistemic joy then names the feeling we have in knowing our intellectual potential. It is thus maybe our knowing feeling. When a person experiences this knowing feeling, she is able to feel herself more fully move through the world. She can expand and contract, fail and succeed, and act not just in fear of being wrong or not knowing enough. She can greet the world with brave wonder, not feeling like she has to be invulnerable, a constant expert, or unshakable in her beliefs. She can mess up, fail, succeed, learn, compete, collaborate, be critical of herself. And though it may seem odd, this person becomes poetry, taking what's expected of her by virtue of her gender and rearranging as poets do to show a new way of being, her way of being, with a point of view that only she has. In truth, really, we should all be poets. So, back to me at my desk all those years ago. After about a decade of trying to write that book and never having the time to do so, I asked a friend of mine from grad school to help turn this vision into reality. The book now exists as a multi-authored volume of 20 women experts in philosophy translating their expertise to their younger counterparts. It's a good example, I think, of advocacy, amplification, and adoration. The chapters cite loads of women philosophers, and the tone of the book really honors its readers. The cover of the book bears a pomegranate, which represents Persephone. If you remember the little we do know of this myth, she eats some pomegranate seeds and thus must spend half the year on Earth and half in Hades, the only divinity to rule in 2 realms. I have loved her since I was little, though, as I said, we don't really know much about her. So I decided to write her story as the prologue to that book that I had named all those years ago in my office, Philosophy for Girls. I describe how she maps her worlds, finds her own voice, and figures it out. In short, she goes into her own consciousness. She goes into her own intellectual powers. And yes, those powers can be terrifying. But we are like Persephone. We too must learn to navigate our worlds with its home, work, school, relationships, passions, identities. And like Persephone, we learn that there is power in being thoughtful and discerning. It may seem like a brief amount of time to figure it all out in this short mortal life that we have, and in many ways it is. But many have come before, and many will follow. We will all take our own paths with our own voices, knowing that there is an ancient goddess who still roams her realms, doing the same. And if we listen very carefully, across all space and through all time, we can hear her adoring us even now.